Dirty facts about Roman public baths that will make you say, ew. The steam rises in lazy tendrils from the warm water. You recline against a marble slab, enjoying the heat on your tired muscles after a long day of sightseeing. Perhaps you'll take a break from your book and chat with one of the slaves waiting nearby to give you a back scratch or a massage. But if you actually did bathe in the Roman public bathhouses, or thermae, you wouldn't be alone. And what went on behind those massive marble doors might shock you. Welcome to my channel. Today we're exploring the steamy, not-so-clean side of ancient Rome. If you like what you see here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. The most famous Roman bathhouse was the sprawling complex built by Emperor Diocletian in the 3rd century AD, and known as the Baths of Diocletian. It was huge, boasting 180 acres of space and enough room to bathe 2,000 people at once. The complex was a gift to the people of Rome, free to all men of every social standing. However, there was a catch. To use the facilities, patrons had to bring their own soap and oil. The emperor may have paid for the baths, but it was a bring-your-own toiletries kind of place. If you showed up without oil for the massage or soap for cleaning, you would be very uncomfortable for the next few hours. Also, these public baths were only for men. Women could use the baths in the private spaces within their own homes, but they were forbidden from entering the public bathhouses. This meant that when men entered the baths, all bets were off. Even though there were rules posted around the bathhouses requiring patrons to be on their best behavior, no fighting, no indecent conduct, no disturbing the peace, let's just say some people weren't so innocent. It was basically the Roman version of a public swimming pool locker room. Things happen in those enclosed spaces that should stay in the enclosed spaces. One vivid description of the goings-on in the public baths comes from the writings of the Roman philosopher Pliny the Younger. In one particularly steamy tale, he describes two men who became lovers after meeting in the hot baths. The older man was married and looking for an exciting tryst outside his lackluster marriage. He spots a handsome young slave in the baths and decides that this is the boy for him. But there's a problem. His new love interest is covered head to toe in pumice stone and dirt from scrubbing himself in the baths. So the older man tells him to meet him in a certain spot once he has cleaned himself up. They escape the baths together and head to the older man's house where they can be alone. When the older man's wife asks who her husband's new companion is, he simply replies, "A friend whom I met in the baths, whom I found dirty, and so I washed." That was a little white lie. The friend wasn't exactly dirty when they met. They were both pretty clean after scrubbing in the public baths. Some of the liaisons formed in the public baths were more scandalous than others. Roman emperors weren't allowed to marry just anyone. There were rules and regulations about who the emperor could wed in order to keep the bloodline pure. For example, Julius Caesar's great-granddaughter, Julia Maesa, was betrothed to her uncle, the emperor's son, to secure the succession. She was also betrothed to a man named C. Calvisius, but she didn't want to marry either of them. Julia wanted to be free to have affairs with whomever she pleased and still remain in the emperor's good graces. She wrote to her grandmother, the formidable Livia, asking for advice. Livia's response has been immortalized in a letter that any betrayed spouse can relate to today. You complain that you don't know how to escape from your husband. You needn't look far for the means. I know well enough who is hindering you. You can't tell me that you aren't aware of it yourself. Calvisius was a frequent patron of the public baths. He knew Julia would come there to bathe, and that's where the two of them carried out an affair. This was too scandalous for Roman society, and the couple was forced to flee Rome for a villa in southern Italy where they could be alone without prying eyes. But it seems Julia's heart wasn't fully in it. She soon grew bored with Calvisius and began having an affair with her grandmother's freedman instead. Her grandmother got wind of the situation and sent the freedman away, although the two continued their relationship even after he left. Calvisius eventually took his own life, and Julia married her original fiancé and became the mother of two of Rome's future emperors. However, she never forgot the freedman. When she learned he had died, she lamented, "What was the fate of my beloved?" For some people, the public baths were a place of business, not pleasure. Peddlers and merchants would set up shop in the bathhouses. Their wares were easy to transport and quick to set up, making them perfect for traveling salesmen. These vendors sold everything from food and drink, to combs and perfumes, to jewelry and clothing. Some were traveling salesmen passing through Rome, while others used the bathhouses as their home base, sleeping in their wagons and making the baths their shop for the day. For the merchants, it was a captive audience of men who were likely to purchase items they needed, like oils and soaps, or perhaps a comb for styling their hair in the latest fashions. The peddlers hawking their wares would interrupt the quiet moments of solitude that bathers came for, but it was a small price to pay for a captive audience. Gambling was another pastime that was popular in the public baths. Bets were made on athletic competitions between patrons, and dice games and ball games were popular ways to pass the time and lose money. There was even a coin toss game similar to the coin toss games at carnivals today. A player would put a stake into the ground and toss coins onto it. The coins would bounce off the stake and land in containers around its base. Players would bet on where the coins would land, and the game's inventor made sure the odds were always in his favor. The patrons of the baths might be the last people you expect to cause trouble, but they were the ones causing all the mischief, from starting fights to stealing. While it was technically illegal to carry weapons into the baths, patrons managed to get them in all the time. Fights broke out over gambling debts, territorial disputes, and personal grudges. Patrons would also hide valuables in the communal areas of the baths, and then wait to see who would take them. Slaves were especially vulnerable to theft, as they were unallowed to bring their own belongings into the baths, and would often be stripped naked during the scrubbing process. And if you thought the fights and thieving was bad, you haven't met the worst of the patrons. Rome was crawling with beggars, fortune tellers, and con artists who preyed on vulnerable people. The blind were brought to the baths so they could be robbed of their meager possessions. Beggars pretended to be fortune tellers, offering readings that were actually instructions to steal valuables from fellow patrons. Con artists would offer to hold valuables for a fee, then run away with them. Thieves would sneak into the baths and cut off sleeping patrons' fingers, taking rings with them as souvenirs. Emperor Nero tried to put a stop to the madness and issued an edict banning begging, brawling, and thieving in the baths. The edict also banned prostitutes from soliciting, which must have been a huge blow to the sex workers who had been eyeing the patrons in the steamy baths for potential clients. The rules were posted in the baths, but they weren't always followed. If you ever visit the ruins of the Roman baths today, imagine the sights and sounds you would have encountered all those years ago. Picture men of all ages and social classes bathing, gossiping, gambling, and striking up surprising friendships. Add to that the shouts of vendors trying to sell you something you don't need, the clatter of coins being tossed, the sound of voices raised in anger, and the occasional splash as someone takes a big swig from a wine jug. All that, plus the smell of stale urine and unwashed bodies. And you have a recipe for the smelliest part of ancient Rome. What surprised you the most about Roman public baths? Let us know in the comments below. And remember to hit that subscribe button for more videos like this one.